The North Atlantic was dark and quiet that night, the kind of silence sailors learn not to trust. A Royal Navy warship moved steadily through the cold water, its engines low, its patrol routine seemingly uneventful. On the surface, nothing looked unusual, but far below the waves, 2 Russian submarines had already locked onto the ship's acoustic signature. Their sonar operators listened carefully as the steady rhythm of the warship's propellers echoed through the ocean. To them, the situation looked simple: 2 hunters tracking a single target. But somewhere inside the British warship, something had already begun to change. And the submarines had no idea they were no longer the only ones listening. The Royal Navy warship moved steadily through the cold waters of the North Atlantic, its grey hull cutting quietly across the dark surface. Around it, the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. No coastlines, no civilian traffic, just deep water and a night sky covered with low clouds drifting slowly across the horizon. For the crew on board, it was another long patrol far from home. Ships like this spent weeks at sea monitoring activity across some of the busiest and most strategically important waters in the world. The North Atlantic was not empty, even when it looked that way. Beneath the calm surface moved shipping traffic, fishing vessels, military patrols, and sometimes things that preferred not to be seen at all. Inside the warship's operations room, the atmosphere remained calm and professional. Dim lights illuminated rows of screens showing radar sweeps, navigation charts, and sonar data scrolling quietly across digital displays. Officers spoke in low voices as they monitored the ship's systems. On the bridge above, the watch officer stood near the forward windows, scanning the dark water ahead. The sea state was calm, with long rolling waves reflecting faint starlight through the clouds. The ship held a steady course, its engines humming at a controlled cruising speed designed to minimize noise while maintaining patrol coverage. Everything about the situation felt routine. Radar showed nothing unusual. The nearest known vessel was more than 60 miles away, slowly moving along a commercial shipping route far to the south. Air traffic was clear. Satellite communications were quiet. On the surface, the ocean appeared empty. But beneath the surface, the ship's sonar systems continued their constant task of listening to the sea. Deep inside the hull, a sonar operator sat focused on his console, headphones pressed firmly over his ears. Unlike radar, May's sonar did not send pictures. It sent sound. Every propeller, every engine vibration, every mechanical movement beneath the water created a unique acoustic signature that traveled for miles through the ocean. Most of the time, the sonar display filled with the normal background noise of the sea, distant shipping, underwater currents. Even marine life sometimes produced sounds strong enough to appear on the system. The operator adjusted one of the filters on his console, isolating a narrow frequency band and allowing the system to focus more precisely on faint signals moving through the water. For several seconds, nothing unusual appeared. Then something caught his attention. At first it was barely noticeable, just a faint repeating vibration buried deep within the ocean's background noise. The rhythm was slow and mechanical, repeating at regular intervals. It did not match the chaotic sounds of waves or wildlife. The operator leaned closer to his screen, adjusting the gain slightly. The signal grew clearer. A steady pulse, propeller noise. He studied the data for several more seconds before speaking quietly across the room. Sonar contact possible. A nearby officer looked up from his display. Range? Uncertain, the operator replied. Very faint. Could be distant shipping. The officer nodded, unconcerned for the moment. The Atlantic was full of ships, and faint contacts were common during patrols. Most disappeared after a few minutes, as vessels changed course or moved beyond detection range. Still, the sonar operator continued listening. The sound remained. Steady, consistent, almost too consistent. He adjusted the filter again, isolating the frequency more precisely. The acoustic pattern sharpened across the display, revealing the mechanical rhythm more clearly now. It was definitely a propeller. But something about it felt strange. The operator watched the signal carefully, comparing the acoustic pattern with known ship signatures stored inside the system's database. Merchant ships usually produce slower, heavier propeller patterns. Fishing vessels sounded irregular and noisy. This one was different. Controlled, balanced, military. The operator frowned slightly as he listened again. Then he noticed something else. The rhythm wasn't alone. Hidden just behind the first signal was a second pattern, slightly offset in timing. Another propeller signature, quieter but unmistakably mechanical. Two separate acoustic sources moving through the water. He slowly removed one ear from his headset and spoke again, his voice calmer but more serious this time. Sonar to operations. I may have two contacts. Across the dim operations room, several officers turned their attention toward the console. Repeat that, one of them said. The sonar operator kept his eyes locked on the screen as the signals continued repeating through the ocean. Two mechanical signatures, very faint. A brief silence filled the room. Then the operator added the detail that made everyone look up. Both underwater. Nearly 200 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic, the ocean looked completely different. Sunlight could not reach this depth. The water was dark, cold, and silent, except for the distant sounds traveling through it. Inside one of the Russian submarines, the atmosphere was calm but intensely focused. The narrow control room was filled with the low hum of electrical systems and the soft glow of instrument panels. Crew members moved carefully through the tight space, speaking quietly as they monitored the submarine's sensors. At the center of the compartment, a sonar operator sat with his headphones on, studying the acoustic display in front of him. Unlike the warship above, the submarine did not rely on radar. Down here, everything depended on sound, and the sound they were listening to was clear. The steady mechanical rhythm of a surface warship's propellers echoed through the deep water. The acoustic signature was strong enough now that there was little doubt about what they were hearing. A Royal Navy vessel moving steadily across the surface far above them. The operator slowly adjusted the tracking line on his display, refining the contact's position. Each rotation of the propellers sent another pulse through the ocean, allowing the submarine systems to estimate the ship's speed and direction. He spoke calmly toward the command station. Surface contact confirmed. Bearing steady. The Russian commander stepped closer to the console, glancing down at the display. Identification? The operator compared the acoustic pattern with stored profiles in the submarine's database. Warships produced very different sound patterns compared to civilian vessels. Their propellers were carefully engineered to reduce noise, but even the quietest naval ships still left acoustic fingerprints. After several seconds, the operator answered. Military signature. Likely Royal Navy. The commander nodded slowly. Above them, somewhere in the darkness of the ocean surface, a British warship continued its patrol, apparently unaware of the submarine quietly observing it from below. But this submarine was not alone. Several kilometers away, hidden at a slightly different depth, a second Russian submarine moved silently through the same stretch of ocean. It, too, had been listening to the same sound echoing across the water. The two submarines were operating in loose coordination, sharing the same objective: track the movement of NATO naval patrols moving through the North Atlantic. On a secure communication channel that used extremely low-frequency signals, a short coded message passed quietly between the two underwater vessels. Contact confirmed. Surface warship. Course steady. Within moments, both submarines adjusted their positions slightly. They did not move aggressively or increase speed. Submarine commanders understood the importance of patience. Instead, they allowed the British warship to continue on its course while carefully positioning themselves along its projected path. From above, the ocean still appeared empty. But beneath the surface, the geometry of a quiet hunt was already forming. Inside the first Russian submarine, the sonar operator continued refining the tracking solution. With every passing minute, the acoustic signal became clearer. The warship's engines, its propeller blades, even small mechanical vibrations traveled downward through the water. Every sound revealed information. Speed, direction, distance. The commander studied the tactical display where the ship's estimated path was slowly being drawn across the screen. For the moment, the situation looked favorable. A surface warship was often at a disadvantage against submarines in deep water. Radar could scan the horizon, but it could not see beneath the ocean. As long as the submarines remained quiet and relied on passive sonar, they could observe without revealing their presence. One of the officers glanced at the tracking display again. "Contact maintaining steady course," he reported. The commander folded his arms, considering the situation. "Maintain distance," he said calmly. "Do not close yet." The order was deliberate. Submarine warfare was rarely about rushing toward a target. It was about patience, positioning, and information. For now, their task was simple. Watch, listen, follow. Minutes passed as the British warship continued moving across the surface above them. The submarines remained deep, adjusting their heading only slightly to maintain their acoustic tracking position. To the Russian crews, the situation looked almost routine. 2 submarines, 1 surface warship, a perfect opportunity to observe NATO naval movement without being detected. But several kilometers above them, inside the British the ship's operations room, sonar operators were still studying the faint signals moving through the water. Signals that had not disappeared. Signals that had slowly begun to grow clearer. Back inside the Russian submarine, the sonar operator suddenly leaned slightly closer to his display. The acoustic signal from the warship had shifted, very slightly. The operator studied the change for a moment before speaking. "Contact speed adjustment detected." The commander looked up immediately. "Course change?" The operator shook his head slowly. "No, not a course change." He replayed the acoustic pattern once more through his headphones, listening carefully. Then he added something that caused a brief silence in the control room. "It sounds like they're listening." Inside the Royal Navy warship, the operations room had grown noticeably quieter. The faint sonar signals detected earlier had not disappeared. If anything, they had become slightly clearer, not loud enough to trigger alarms, but persistent enough to hold the attention of every operator monitoring the system. The sonar technician leaned forward in his chair, adjusting the filter settings once again. His screen displayed a narrow band of acoustic frequencies, moving slowly across the dark ocean surrounding the ship. Most of the background noise remained random and irregular, the natural sounds of the sea. But hidden within that noise was something different, something controlled. The same repeating mechanical rhythm he had noticed earlier was still there, pulsing quietly through the water at steady intervals. He listened again through his headset. Propeller blades. There was no doubt about it now. The sound wasn't from marine life or ocean currents. It was mechanical, carefully engineered, balanced in a way that suggested a propulsion system designed to operate quietly underwater. Across the road, another operator glanced over. "Still there?" The sonar technician nodded slowly without taking his eyes off the display. "Same signal, same pattern." The officer supervising the operations room stepped closer. "Range?" "Hard to say," the technician replied. "It's faint. Could be far out." He paused for a moment before adding another detail. "And there may be 2 of them." That statement caused several heads to turn. The officer leaned closer to the console. "2 contacts? Possibly," the sonar operator said. "The signals overlap slightly. Different rotation timing, different acoustic rhythm. In other words, 2 separate propeller systems moving somewhere beneath the ocean surface." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The North Atlantic was a region where NATO and Russian naval forces often operated within the same waters. Encounters between ships and submarines were not unusual, but detecting a submarine was never simple. Submarines were designed specifically to avoid being heard. which meant if the sonar team could detect them at all, it was worth paying attention. The officer looked toward the center of the operations room where the ship's captain stood reviewing the navigation display. "Captain, sonar may have possible underwater contacts." The captain stepped forward, calm but attentive. "Details." The sonar technician replayed the acoustic data across the display. Faint pulses appeared as narrow lines scrolling across the screen. "Two mechanical signatures," he explained. "Very quiet, but consistent." The captain listened through the spare headset for a few seconds. The sound was barely audible, a soft, distant rhythm, but it was unmistakably mechanical. He removed the headset and looked back at the display. "Could be distant shipping?" The sonar operator shook his head slightly. "Unlikely, sir. Surface ships usually produce stronger broadband noise. This is cleaner." Cleaner meant quieter, and quieter usually meant submarines. The captain remained silent for a moment, thinking. He had commanded ships long enough to know that sonar contacts were rarely clear at first. The ocean could distort sound in unpredictable ways, and many false contacts disappeared after a few minutes. But experienced captains also knew that the worst mistake was ignoring a signal that refused to disappear. He turned toward the navigation officer. "Adjust speed." The officer looked up. "New speed, sir. Reduced by 3 knots. The order was small enough not to appear suspicious to anyone watching from a distance. But underwater, even small speed changes could alter the acoustic profile of a ship. It was a simple test. If something below the surface was tracking them, that change might force it to react. Moments later, the warship's engines reduced power slightly. The vibration running through the hull softened as the ship's speed dropped just enough to alter the rhythm of its propellers. Inside the sonar room, everyone waited. Seconds passed, then a minute. The sonar operator studied the display carefully as new acoustic data began scrolling across the screen. At first, nothing changed. Then the operator's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer to the console, adjusting the filter again to isolate the faint signals buried in the background noise. The second mechanical rhythm had shifted. Not much, just enough to notice. The operator listened again through his headphones. The signal had moved slightly across the bearing indicator. A tiny change, but a deliberate one. He slowly removed the headset and looked toward the captain. "Sir?" The captain turned. The sonar technician pointed at the display. "Contact just changed bearing." A quiet silence filled the operations room, because that meant only one thing. Something beneath the water had just adjusted its position, and it was almost certainly following them. Far below the surface, the change did not go unnoticed. Inside the Russian submarine's control room, the sonar operator listened carefully as the sound of the British warship's engines shifted slightly through the water. It was a small adjustment, only a minor reduction in speed. But underwater, even the smallest changes could be heard across great distances. The operator replayed the acoustic signal through his headset, studying the rhythm of the propellers. "Surface contact reduced speed," he reported calmly. The submarine commander looked toward the tactical display where the British ship's estimated track was being projected across the map. "Course change?" "No, Captain. Course remains steady." The commander considered that for a moment. Warships sometimes changed speed during routine patrols. It could mean nothing at all. But experienced submarine crews understood that small movements often carried hidden meaning. Above them, the Royal Navy warship had slowed just enough to change its acoustic pattern. And moments later, something else had happened. The submarine's sonar tracking solution had shifted slightly. The commander folded his arms. "Maintain position," he ordered. "Do not close distance." The submarine continued gliding silently through the cold Atlantic water, its propulsion system operating at extremely low speed to reduce noise. Every movement was carefully controlled. Several kilometers away, The second Russian submarine received the same acoustic update through its own sonar system. Its operators had heard the same shift in the warship's propeller rhythm. Through a brief coded transmission, the two submarines quietly confirmed the contact update. Surface warship speed adjustment. Tracking continues. The two vessels maintained their positions, moving slowly through the deep water like shadows following the sound above them. From the Russian perspective, the situation still appeared favorable. A single surface warship, two submarines observing from below. As long as they remained quiet and patient, the warship would have little chance of detecting them. Inside the British warship's operations room, however, the atmosphere had become more focused. The sonar team continued monitoring the faint acoustic signals buried in the ocean's background noise. The two mechanical rhythms they had detected earlier were still present, repeating steadily through the water. They had not disappeared. If anything, they had grown slightly more defined. The sonar operator marked both signals on the tactical display. Two faint bearing lines slowly extended outward from the ship's position, each pointing toward a distant, underwater contact. The signals were still too weak to estimate precise distance, but their patterns had become clearer. Two separate propeller signatures, two different rotational rhythms, two contacts moving independently. Across the room, the captain studied the display carefully. Submarines. He was almost certain of it now. But certainty in underwater warfare required patience. Active sonar could confirm the contacts instantly, sending powerful sound pulses into the ocean to reveal anything hiding beneath the surface. But active sonar came with a cost. The moment a warship transmitted an active sonar ping, every submarine within dozens of miles would know exactly where that ship was. For now, the captain preferred silence. "Maintain passive tracking," he said. The sonar team nodded. The ship continued forward, making only subtle adjustments to its speed and course. Each maneuver was small enough to appear routine, but deliberate enough to test how the unknown contacts reacted. Minutes passed. The ocean around the ship remained calm. Then the sonar operator spoke again. "Contact 1. Bearing stable." He pointed at the first line extending across the display. Then he shifted his finger slightly. "Contact 2. Adjusting slightly." The captain leaned closer. "How much?" "Only a few degrees," the operator replied, "but it followed our speed change." In other words, something underwater had reacted to the ship's maneuver. That reaction was enough to confirm the captain's suspicion. The ship was not alone. Below the surface, the two Russian submarines continued their quiet pursuit. From their perspective, the warship's movements appeared uncertain, small adjustments that could easily be interpreted as routine navigation. Neither submarine had increased speed. Neither had transmitted active sonar. Both remained silent. To the Russian commanders, the British warship still looked unaware of the observers beneath it. But inside the warship's operations room, the sonar team was already building a clearer picture of what surrounded them. The operator adjusted the system filters one more time, narrowing the acoustic frequency window and allowing the software to isolate the faint mechanical sounds more precisely. The display sharpened. The two signals separated more clearly across the screen. Two individual propeller signatures. Two underwater contacts moving in coordination. The sonar operator slowly removed his headset and looked toward the captain. His voice was calm, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Sir, we now have two distinct submarine signatures." For the first time since the signals had appeared, there was no longer any doubt. Two submarines were following them. For nearly 20 minutes, the situation in the North Atlantic remained locked in a silent balance. The Royal Navy warship continued moving steadily across the surface, its grey silhouette cutting through the dark water while the sonar team carefully monitored the two submarine contacts beneath them. The signals were still faint, but now they were consistent enough that no one in the operations room doubted what they were hearing. Two submarines hit. Nez. both moving quietly, both maintaining position somewhere below the ship's path. Inside the operations room, the captain stood beside the tactical display, studying the two bearing lines extending outward across the digital map. Each line represented one of the underwater contacts detected by sonar. The lines had shifted slowly over time, confirming what the crew had already suspected. The submarines were not simply passing through the area. They were following. The captain remained calm as he considered the situation. Submarines tracking surface warships in the North Atlantic was not unusual. Naval forces from multiple countries operated in these waters, and quiet observation missions happened more often than the public realized. But encounters like this required careful handling. Escalating the situation could easily transform a routine patrol into something far more serious. Instead, the captain gave a quiet order. Transmit coded message. Across the room, the communications officer turned toward his console. Encrypted channel? The captain nodded. Priority routing. Within seconds, the communications system began transmitting a short burst of encrypted data through a narrow military satellite link. The message lasted only a few seconds before the system returned to normal standby. To anyone monitoring civilian communication frequencies, the transmission would have looked like routine background traffic. But the message had been delivered. Somewhere else in the Atlantic, another Royal Navy vessel had just received it. Beneath the surface, however, the two Russian submarines remained focused on the warship above them. Inside the first submarine, the sonar operator continued tracking the British ship's acoustic signature. The sound of its propellers echoed steadily through the water, giving the submarine a reliable reference point for its position. Everything appeared stable. Then the operator paused. He replayed the latest sonar sweep again through his headphones. Something new had appeared. At first it was extremely faint, a soft mechanical vibration buried deep within the ocean's background noise. The operator adjusted the filter controls, narrowing the frequency range to isolate the signal more clearly. The sound grew slightly stronger, another propeller, but it wasn't coming from the warship. The operator leaned closer to the display. A third acoustic pattern had entered the sonar picture. He spoke toward the command station. New contact detected. The submarine commander turned immediately. Surface vessel? The operator shook his head slowly. No. Underwater. The control room fell silent. Another submarine? The operator began analyzing the signal carefully, comparing the acoustic rhythm with the known signatures stored in the submarine's internal database. The pattern did not match either of the two Russian submarines currently operating in the area. That meant only one thing. A third submarine had entered the situation. The commander's expression tightened slightly. Bearing? The operator pointed to the display. Behind the warship, approximately 12 kilometers. In other words, the new contact was positioned almost directly behind the British vessel, moving quietly along the same general path. Inside the second Russian submarine, the same signal began appearing on its sonar system as well. Within moments, both Russian crews were listening to the same unfamiliar acoustic rhythm moving slowly through the water. A short, coded message passed between the two submarines. Unknown underwater contact detected. Both vessels immediately reduced speed slightly, minimizing their own noise while attempting to gather more information about the new arrival. The sonar operator continued analyzing the signal. The propeller rhythm was extremely quiet, more advanced than the acoustic profile of most conventional submarines. Operator checked the database again. Then he froze. The pattern matched a profile stored deep within NATO's submarine recognition data. He looked toward the commander. Captain! The commander stepped closer. What is it? The operator spoke quietly. Signature analysis suggests NATO attack submarine. The commander's eyes narrowed. Identification? The operator hesitated for a moment before answering. Most likely Royal Navy. Across both Russian submarines, the realization began spreading quickly through the control rooms. The British warship they had been tracking was no longer alone. Somewhere in the dark Atlantic water behind it, a silent hunter had been moving closer the entire time. And now, for the first time since the encounter had begun, the Russian crews understood something deeply uncomfortable. They might no longer be the ones doing the tracking. Far beneath the cold surface of the North Atlantic, the balance of the encounter had quietly changed. For most of the past hour, the two Russian submarines had believed they were controlling the situation. From their perspective, the geometry had been simple. Two underwater observers tracking a single surface warship moving across open water. But now the sonar picture inside both submarines told a very different story. A third contact had entered the environment, and it was not behaving like a passive observer. Inside the first Russian submarine, the sonar operator continued studying the new acoustic signal that had appeared behind the British warship. The sound was faint, but extremely clear. A steady mechanical rhythm moving smoothly through the water with remarkable quietness, much quieter than most submarines. The operator replayed the acoustic sample through his headphones again. Every detail confirmed the same conclusion. Nuclear-powered attack submarine, and the acoustic profile strongly matched one used by the Royal Navy. Across the control room, the submarine commander studied the tactical display where 3 underwater contacts were now marked across the digital map. One surface warship above, 2 Russian submarines positioned at distance, and now a third submarine moving slowly along the warship's path. The geometry of the situation had changed. The Russian submarines had been positioned ahead and to the sides of the warship, carefully maintaining distance while tracking its movement through passive sonar. But the new submarine had approached from the rear, quietly, deliberately, without announcing its presence. The commander understood immediately what that meant. While the Russian submarines had been focused on the surface ship, the new arrival had likely been tracking the entire situation from outside their detection range. Watching, listening, learning. Inside the second Russian submarine, the same realization was spreading across its control room. Its sonar operators were now clearly detecting both the warship above and the new underwater contact moving behind it. A brief coded message passed between the 2 Russian vessels. Third submarine confirmed, likely Royal Navy. Moments later, another message followed. Maintain distance. No escalation. The decision was quick and professional. Encounters like this were not battles. Submarines operating in international waters were constantly observing one another, testing reactions and gathering intelligence. But once a situation became tactically unfavorable, experienced commanders knew when to disengage. Inside the first submarine, the commander issued a quiet order. Reduce speed. Alter course 10 degrees. The submarine responded almost instantly, adjusting its heading while maintaining extremely low propulsion noise. The maneuver was subtle, designed to slowly open distance without appearing abrupt or hostile. Several kilometers away, the second Russian submarine made a similar adjustment. Gradually, the 2 underwater vessels began widening their spacing from the British ship and the new submarine behind it. On the surface, the Royal Navy warship maintained its steady course across the dark Atlantic water. From the outside, nothing about its posture had changed. Its speed remained controlled, its radar profile quiet, its movements calm. But inside its operations room, the tactical display showed the encounter unfolding clearly. 2 submarine contacts that had once been following were now slowly drifting away. The sonar operator watched the bearing lines widen across the display. Contacts increasing distance, he reported. The captain gave a small nod. Behind the warship, deep below the water, the Royal Navy submarine continued moving silently through the Atlantic. It had never rushed the situation. It had simply allowed the encounter to develop until its presence became known. Sometimes that was enough. Across the Russian submarines, sonar operators continued monitoring the environment as their vessels slowly withdrew from the area. The British submarine remained detectable on their systems, but it did not pursue aggressively. It simply held position behind the warship, maintaining awareness. Professional. Controlled. The silent tension that had filled the ocean earlier gradually faded as the distances between the vessels increased. Within half an hour, the two Russian submarines had moved far enough away that the British sonar systems could only detect their signatures faintly once again. Soon those signals disappeared entirely into the deep Atlantic noise. Inside the Royal Navy warship, the operations room slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Sonar continued scanning the ocean, radar swept the empty horizon, and the navigation officer confirmed the ship's original patrol course. The captain looked once more at the now quiet tactical display. The encounter was over. No warnings had been issued. No weapons had been activated. No confrontation had taken place. Yet every crew involved understood what had happened beneath the surface of the Atlantic that night. The Russian submarines had approached expecting to quietly observe a lone warship. Instead, they had discovered something else waiting in the dark water. Because control at sea is rarely decided by who arrives with more weapons. It is decided by who understands the situation first. Outside, the Royal Navy warship continued its patrol through the cold Atlantic night, its engines steady as it disappeared slowly across the open water. And far below the surface, somewhere in the darkness behind it, the silent submarine continued listening to the ocean,